Right there. Hello. Right, okay, thanks, Jared. Right, let's see. Buttons. There we go. Right, okay. Like Jared said, my name's Sian Ferraz. I'm a historian and heritage consultant at a heritage and architecture firm in Perth called Dar Studios. And I'm here to talk to you today about Albany Snake Run Skate Park. But first I'd like to start by acknowledging and paying my respect to the traditional owners of the land in which we meet, the Menang people. I'm really excited to be here with you today in Albany. It's always a good time in Albany. I literally have the scars to prove it. And it's a treat to be here talking about one of my absolute favourite places and an all-time career highlight, the Snake Park. But to give you a bit of a content page about my presentation, so I'm going to give you a bit of a brief introduction about me and my involvement with the skate park. Then I'm going to do like a part one on the history of the skate park, and then a part two, kind of in light of the topic today about reimagining heritage. I'm going to talk about what does Albany Skate Park represent for history and heritage and the reimagining of heritage. Right, my notes say to go slow. Right, so here she is. She's a beaut. So you can all look at this while I talk about myself for a bit. Okay, so my name's Sian. As Jared said, I've been in the heritage industry in WA for almost 15 years, mainly at state government at Department of Planning, Lands and Heritage, or its predecessors. So like some of you here, I lived through State Heritage Office, Department of State Heritage Office, Office of Heritage, spent some time in planning, or I like to call it planning adjacent, and I've done some bits and bobs at Fremantle Prison. Now I'm at Dar Studios, and I work on a variety of really exciting heritage projects, preparing conservation reports, involved with a range of heritage grants works, and just generally doing a deep dive into researching and writing about heritage. So my involvement with the skate park, so while I was at DPLH, at that time the State Heritage Office, I was responsible for State Heritage listing Albany Snake Run Skate Park. So that involved researching and writing material for the heritage assessment, preparing analysis to determine its significance and whether it met the threshold for state listing. Sadly, no site visit was involved as I was quite pregnant at the time. Talking to stakeholders, which was really quite lovely, unique in many ways because there was a lot of community support for registration. Then managing that internal state government process of heritage listings, so preparing agendas, reports, making recommendations, and ultimately gaining approval from the Heritage Council and the Minister for Heritage for entering the place in the State Register. So yeah, like I said, it's been a real career highlight for me, a non-traditional place to research, to analyse and write a history for. In some ways a bit of a challenge, as it's, a bit out of the box. But it was really clear from the outside that it was a place that was really special to the community. There was really clear, strong support, and in many ways it was kind of like that dream case study heritage listing process. Have to admit, I'm a bit nervous here today telling the history of the skate park in Albany to a bunch of Albany people, some of which were actually involved in the heritage listing of it, so I can't make up too much stuff. But it's a real treat to be sharing this story with you and my thoughts on its importance of its history and its heritage listing. As it's not only an interesting story, but also in many ways it can be seen as this milestone or shift in the age and types of places that are considered important enough to be preserved and protected via heritage legislations for future generations. So part one, history of the skate park. So maybe it's obvious or not, I guess what's in a name. So the skate park owes its name, so Snake Run, to its shape. So it's a 140-metre long downhill slalom run built into an already sloping site which was originally an old gravel quarry. And it's shaped a bit like a snake. And now there's bits of one painted on it. So it's one long length of track with a series of bends. So for the proper history part, black and white pictures, right? So in 1975, a group of Albany High School students established the Skateboard Track Committee with the objective of building a skate track in Albany. So contextually, 1975 is actually very early in terms of the wider history of skateboarding worldwide. Skateboarding developed firstly in the US in the early 1970s as an alternative pastime for surfers when the swell was poor. So bored by poor surfing conditions, surfers attached clay wheels to wooden boards and they'd ride them down slopes and embankments to emulate surf conditions but on land. So shortly after the sport was started in the US, it took off in Australia, and the first purpose-built skate park in Australia was built at Albany, which in some ways makes a lot of sense because you may have noticed, as I have done on my morning run, Albany is just one big hill on the sea. But back to the skateboard track committee. So with the parents' help, the students raised $3,000, and the town of Albany was so impressed that they donated an extra $10,000, as well as a block of land adjacent to the high school, which was this former gravel quarry. Construction started in January 1976, and it followed that already excavated area of the quarry, with some areas built up with sand and banks to increase the slope. Its design was specifically made to suit a variety of skills. So the centerline was a modest slope for beginners with steeper sections on either side for more advanced users. There were 3 sharp bends that curved up to vertical in some areas to allow skaters to perform a variety of tricks. And can you believe it? My notes say in capitals. It was finished by the end of month, so the end of January, and it was officially opened in February 1976 with a large community event with worldwide publicity, of which I've got some videos. So I've been promising everyone videos. Let's see if I can work here.
Albany, Western Australia, had a track built specially for skateboarders. What's more, the kids did it themselves, with a little help from their friends and a sympathetic local authority. They've just opened an $18,000 skateboard track built to precise specifications on the side of Mount Clarence, just below the famous Desert Corps Memorial. And this is opening day.
This Albany skateboard track, the first of its type in the world, officially open.
So there's a bit of extra jazzy music there, as this is part of next, like a documentary.
As if the Albany kids weren't lucky enough just to have what is probably the world's best skateboard track, as a bonus on opening week, they also had one of the world's best skateboarders to show them how. American champion, 26-year-old Russ Howell.
It's the best area I've ever skateboarded in, and it's unique in the fact that it's been designed exclusively for the use of skateboarding. Albany is going to become the center like Hawaii was to surfing. Well, Albany is going to be the town that skateboarders are going to look for and say, hey, that town's all right, it's spot on, you know?
I might mute that, I might go on. Right, okay, so as it said, the guest of honor was American skateboarding legend, Russ Howell, and he was famous for, as you'll see in my next video, his skateboarding gymnastics tricks, handstands and 360-degree spinning. So there's a video of him at Albany actually doing this. Howell was very public in his opinion that the skate park was the best he'd ever seen. Next. So I went out there yesterday and was doing very similar tricks, but I had to submit my presentation a couple of weeks ago, so couldn't include them. Right. Okay, so what happened next? So in 1979, so just a few years later, Albany Snake Run hosted Australia's first national skateboard championship. And then almost as soon as the Snake Run had been built, this slalom downhill type of skateboarding became less popular. So skateboarders became interested in technically challenging tricks and jumps, and a different type of skate park was needed to perform those particular tricks. So by the 1980s, the types of skate parks being built were those that we more commonly seen today, with bowls and ramps and jumps, tighter configurations, higher jumps, banks and rails, suitable not only to skateboarders, but roller skaters, scooters, bikes. So what this means is that today those early slalom-type skate parks are rare. So very few were built and even fewer of them survive today. And those that remain, like our example in Albany, represent this really early stage of skateboarding history, not just for Albany, but worldwide. Right. Now, so almost 50 years later, the skate park has been recognised as the oldest in Australia, the second oldest in the world. It's included in the Guinness World Records. Its preservation and protection for future generations is legislated by its inclusion in the City of Albany's Heritage List and by the Heritage Council's inclusion in the State Register of Heritage Places. Physically, the skate park is really largely unchanged, with only some small alterations to make some of the walls higher, and it still retains its downhill slalom design, which is one of the reasons why it's so rare. Where have I gone? So why am I here talking about skate park and its heritage listing? Why is this important and worth discussion? Well, for one, it's interesting and unusual. I mean, who's ever been to a heritage history talk about skate park? Probably some of you that were here for the heritage listing celebrations. Again, I wasn't there because I was heavily pregnant. I'm not bitter about it. But the rest of us, we can all tick this off our list. More seriously, when it was added to the State Register, it was only 39 years old, which is very young in terms of the types of places usually added. And also, let's face it, it was a skate park. So not the usual type of places that we're used to seeing being given heritage protection, which are more commonly like old houses, government buildings, churches, places associated with a notable architect. But for me, when I think about the skate park and what it says about heritage in WA, it demonstrates a definite shift in what people and the community consider as important, both the types of places and the age of a place. But in terms of its age, it's not wildly uncommon for places built in the 1970s to be heritage listed, but it's also not typical either. So when I was looking at comparative places of a similar age and equal heritage protection in WA, I came across several Ivan Ivanov buildings, houses, government buildings. There's a few modernist-style churches, modernist-style clock tower in Scarborough. But actually, these are all quite traditional types of places to be included in the State Register for their important architectural style, association with a notable architect, prominent public buildings or community space. Places that are a bit more similar and have been added to the State Register since the skate park. I was thinking of King Neptune's statue in Two Rocks, which is some of the remaining fabric of the Atlantis water park from the 1970s, or the Fremantle Fishing Boat Harbour, which isn't yet on the State Register, but is out for consultation, I think. That's what Inherit said. Which is about telling minority stories and hosting the 1987 America's Cup, which isn't, it's not even 40 years old. All right, so back to this theme of reimagining heritage. I've got a jazzy video that I'm going to play, so you can watch that while I read my notes a bit more closely to make sure I make the right points. All right, here he is. Okay, like I said, to me, it represents several key shifts or reimagining as the parameters of today's session in what types of places are important to be kept and celebrated for future generations. It shows that what people consider to be important and reflective of their history and community identity is shifting from those places I mentioned previously, early settler houses, churches, the local post office or post box, to new and different types of places, including skate parks. A large part of this shift could be attributed just purely to time. So as generational values and attitudes change, so does the type of places that people value as their heritage. But also as time goes by, those places and events that seem relatively recent or young are growing older by the day. So importantly, when I mentioned earlier that the skate park was 39 years old when it was included in the State Register, now almost 9 years later, and for me a whole 8.5, 9-year-old child later, the skate park is 48, which to a large part of the community doesn't really sound that young at all. So to the newer and next generations of people interested in preserving and celebrating history, this shift demonstrates a move away from traditions that some of us are used to and a move towards something else, a new history with different viewpoints and different perspectives. Gets me to thinking, particularly in light of the upcoming 2026, 2029 anniversaries, is what we may be seeing is start of a larger shift in which histories are being told. So for those of you that attended the networking event yesterday, the ongoing work at Strawberry Hill Barn Up to elevate Menang's story is an excellent example in this shift of storytelling. The skate park was originally a dream for a small group of Albany High School students, and now it's on the world stage as one of the oldest surviving skate parks in the world. Is this a precursor to other minority or untold stories coming to the forefront? I personally anticipate that in the future we see more newer and different places being heritage listed, and newer and different stories being told, noting that heritage listing and histories are not necessarily the same thing. It would seem that if ever there was a rule of places being too young, too new, or too different to heritage list, this rule no longer applies, with more non-traditional places being heritage listed all the time, such as the Sydney 2000 Olympic Cauldron, which was heritage listed in 2010 when it was just 10 years old. In many ways, the heritage listing of the skate park already shows Albany to be at the forefront of a modern approach to its identity and understanding what places are important to its current and future generations. Places like this, in many ways like old historic houses and church to generations before, provide the opportunity to tell an alternate story, or should we say updated history, of Albany and its people, and further an updated and modern history of WA. So in way of a roundup, the skate park is just hands down one of my favourite heritage places. I honestly never get tired of telling people that I heritage listed the skate park, and just be warned, I'm going to ride on the coattails of presenting at a heritage conference about a skate park for many months and years to come. The skate park is unique in many ways, and it pushes the boundaries of heritage, likewise for Albany and Western Australia more generally. It shows us a different perspective about history and heritage. It shows us what we, the community, value and want to protect for future generations is changing and evolving. Considering the skate park again through another lens, through the perspective of heritage tourism, it has the opportunity to offer visitors to Albany a new heritage experience. No need to pre-book tickets or arrange opening hours with the local historical society. This history and heritage is free and unexclusive to any visitor. It's an excellent benchmark in Albany's history and heritage, and thanks to resounding community and government support, will be around for generations to come. That's me. Thanks. And that's us.